Okay, for these notes, let's take a look at John Quincy Adams' administration, and we're also going to look at the end at the election of 1828. Alright, so we've already been through the election of 1824, and how much of a contest that was between the really 5 different parties. Well, I guess 4 different parties by the time they got around to the election. John Quincy Adams won, and John Quincy Adams, as president, he's going to make one, in my opinion, real critical error. He does not replace a lot of the people that the president can appoint that serve at the pleasure of the president. He doesn't replace his political opponents. That's a mistake because he doesn't get rid of people who don't like him. Adams felt that what he needed to do was he needed to remove people who were corrupt or people who were incompetent. If you were good at your job, if you knew how to do your job, he left you there. The reason that's a problem is a lot of the people that he leaves in office are people who had supported Andrew Jackson or even John C. Calhoun. And so for the next 4 years, he's got these people in positions where they can undermine his ideas and his goals. And so, it's one thing to have to face your political opponents, in the political sphere, in Congress, in debates, whatever. It's another thing to have to fight those opponents when they're the people that are supposed to be implementing what you're doing. They're over here screwing it up on purpose, and you're the one that's left them in that job. His goals as president: he wanted the government to be more involved. He wanted the government to pay for more things. He wanted the government to pay for a system of roads and canals, kind of that American system that Henry Clay wanted. He wanted a nationally funded university and a nationally funded observatory. And he wanted the government to pass laws that would encourage agriculture, but also manufacturing, art, the sciences, and also literature. He gets his belief that we need to do some of these things from the model that he sees over in Europe. Now, it's important to note, Adams is a Democratic Republican. Don't forget that. He had been elected as a Democratic Republican. But who is his father? John Adams. John Adams was one of the founders of the Federalist Party. What values did John Quincy Adams probably grow up with? Probably those Federalist ideas. Look at these things. The government funding roads and canals, the government funding a university, the government funding an observatory, the government funding manufacturing, and these other art, sciences, and literature. Those are, at their core, Federalist ideas. So he's a good representation of what happens when there's only one political party. All ideas have to be in that party. Now, opposition to John Quincy Adams comes from supporters of Andrew Jackson and John C. Calhoun, of course. Calhoun, because he is Adams' vice president, he is also has the title of President of the Senate. He is in charge of the Senate. That power allowed him to appoint people to committees. And so when Calhoun, learns what Adams wants to do, he finds Adams' political opponents in the Senate and makes sure that they are on the committees that would have to deal with those issues. Since they're already opponents of Adams, they're going to make sure that those ideas and those bills never get out of committee. They will be able to then block his legislative agenda so that at the end of the 4 years it looks like, well, what did this guy do? What did he get through Congress? Well, nothing. He's also going to be attacked by newspapers that support Andrew Jackson and newspapers that support John C. Calhoun also. He'll be attacked by those papers through his term. Just for everything that he does or everything Congress is able to block. Southerners also tended to oppose him. If you look back at those goals real quick that we wrote down, a lot of them are issues that the southern states did not support. So, there's kind of a natural political opposition there. Whereas the northerners and westerners tended to support most of the American system, and so he'll find a little bit more support there. Among the West, he may not find support for the nationally funded university or observatory, but the roads, the canals, protection of American businesses, he's going to find some support there. Okay, so the tariff issue is going to be something that shows up in the late 1800s, and I just wanted to bring up this graphic. You don't have to copy this down at all, but I just wanted to show you this to kind of give you an idea of how tariffs work in case you still don't understand. I know we've been through it in class a couple times, but I just want to make sure you understand how it works. Okay, so we'll take the two countries here. So we have the United States and Britain, and here we've got American-made cloth costs $4 a roll. That's where we want to stay right here. So there, we're at $4 a roll. There, I can underline it. Okay, over in Britain, their cloth also costs $4 a roll. So if they want to sell this in America, in theory, it only costs $4 a roll. Now, think back to when American manufacturing is just getting started. We're not going to be as efficient. We're not going to have the same quality as the British, who have been producing this kind of stuff for a while. Okay, they've ironed out all their quality issues. So do you want to pay $4 for kind of cheaply made American cloth, or $4 for high quality British cloth? If you have a choice between higher quality for the same price, you're probably going to buy the higher quality. So the way a tariff works is, here comes the British made good. On its way over, the government adds in the tariff, a tax. We are going to tax this at 25% of its value. 25% of $4 is $1. And so the British, in order to make up for that $1 tax, they're going to add that dollar onto the final cost, making the final cost of the British made good $5. And so now you're faced with the question of, okay, do you want to pay $5 for the better quality, or do you want to pay $4 because it's cheaper? And, you know, yeah, sure, the quality may not be as good, but is it really 20% better in terms of what you're getting? That's the goal of a tariff, to make the foreign good more expensive. So there really are two kinds of tariffs in the world. There are things called revenue tariffs. Revenue tariff is typically very low, real simple. It is just designed to generate revenue, to earn some income for the national government. Most countries that use tariffs will use these revenue tariffs because they don't typically make the other country angry. Okay? And so you'll have a very low tariff. Everybody kind of understands that. You know, you pay a little tax, but it's just a little one. The other kind of tariffs are called protective tariffs. These are the ones that will be extremely high. Their sole purpose is to make foreign products more expensive. The example of the British cloth and the American cloth. Okay? By making these goods more expensive, they protect producers, in this case American producers, from foreign competition. Okay? The problem with them is that foreign governments will retaliate. If we place a protective tariff on something coming from Britain, Britain is going to place a protective tariff on something coming from the United States. Not necessarily because they want to protect their industry, but because they're trying to retaliate economically against the U.S. The reason this is a problem in the 1800s is because of what we saw in an earlier set of notes, the sectionalism that's going on in the United States. Because typically, when we place these protective tariffs, they're placed on goods and that are being created in the North, and so the tariffs are protecting manufacturers in the North. When Britain retaliates, they look at, okay, what are we importing most from America? And they find that that is American cotton. And so they raised tariffs on that American cotton. The problem for America is you have a tariff that is protecting one section of the country and ultimately hurting the other section, in this case the South, when Britain places that extra tax on the southern cotton. The reason this is a problem during Adams' administration is because of something called the Tariff of Abominations. Officially, it's the Tariff of 1828, but it'll pick up the nickname the Tariff of Abominations, and we'll see why here in just a little bit. Okay? In 1828, it's going to be an election year, and Jackson's supporters, who don't really like protective tariffs, they're going to introduce this one. It raises tariffs by huge levels, like 33 1/3%. I mean, it's just such an astronomical number. I mean, they believed that they would introduce this idea of a tariff. You know, the common people up in the north won't really look at the details. They'll just know, oh, a protective tariff has been introduced. That'll be good for us. But because it is so high, because it's so crazy high, everyone will vote against it. Then in November, when it's election time, the voters will be angry at Adams because, hey, you were going to get a protective tariff passed, and you didn't. Congress voted against it, and so here at the ballot box, we're going to vote against you. Okay? That'll be a great plan because then that'll help Andrew Jackson get elected. Their problem is it actually passed. They felt that the Northerners wouldn't vote for it because it was so huge and would cause so many problems. The Northerners actually basically looked at it and said, well, it does have some flaws, but on the whole, it's a protective tariff, and we like that. And so all of a sudden, you're going to have in the campaign one group that says, look, we tried to vote for this protective tariff, but Jackson's people killed it. So Jackson supporters in Congress, instead of killing the bill, go ahead and vote for it to keep it from being a campaign issue. You know, Jackson's people don't like tariffs, and so, you know, Jackson can come in and say, look, I don't like that tariff that just passed. Well, fine, you know, that whole section of the country that doesn't like it is already probably going to vote for you anyway. But this keeps Adams from being able to look and say, yeah, Jackson's people didn't protect you here in the North with that tariff. So this will take it off the table as a campaign issue. It's going to cause more problems because of something that happens called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. South Carolina Exposition and Protest is a document. It was written by Vice President John C. Calhoun secretly, and it was adopted by the state of South Carolina as part of a resolution. What it does is it states that the states have a right to determine whether or not a law passed by the national government is constitutional or if it's unconstitutional. And you can take, you know, the idea of this theory all the way back to Madison and Jefferson, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. But this goes a step further. This actually introduces this theory of nullification. Nullification is the idea that the states can refuse to enforce a national law. They can nullify it. Within our state, this national law does not exist. And their whole Calhoun's argument is that states need to be able to do this in order to protect the citizens of that state from some harm. And he kind of leaves that open-ended. Okay? The Tariff of Abominations is going to harm South Carolina economically. It's not taking away anyone's rights, but it is hurting their economy. And so Calhoun argues that states need the idea of nullification in order to protect their citizens from adverse effects from national laws. And you know, you could, on the surface, look at that and say, well, that doesn't happen in America anymore. That's a crazy idea. Until you look in the 2017 issues of, say, sanctuary city laws, where you have cities and, in some cases, counties and states in the United States who have looked at national immigration law and said, our locality will not assist the national government in enforcing its law. Okay? You can also look at it at marijuana laws in 2017. the national government officially has criminalized marijuana. States, and again localities, have said, in these circumstances, in these amounts, it's legal. And so this question of who is supreme, national government, state governments, continues with us. I just want you to keep that in mind. These are not debates that really have ever been settled, even though a lot of times we like to say that they have been. All right, all the way to the election of 1828 now. John Quincy Adams is going to run for re-election. We have the end of the era of good feelings if you don't think it ended in 1824. It clearly has ended now. We have the beginning of another two-party system here. John Quincy Adams and his supporters adopt the title National Republicans. He'll run for president, and his people will nominate a man named Richard Rush as his vice president, since Calhoun is not really in John Quincy Adams' favor at the moment. Jackson and his group are going to brand themselves the Democrats. So they're going to take the Democratic Republican, they're going to drop the Republican, they're going to brand themselves as the Democrats. And Jackson and his supporters nominate John C. Calhoun as vice president because he's been so supportive of Jackson and working in such opposition to John Quincy Adams while he's been Adams' vice president. Calhoun is totally on board with this because, as we said from the election of 1824, Calhoun doesn't care if he's vice president for Adams or vice president for Jackson. He thinks either one of them are going to screw it up. And so then he'll be able to come in at the next election and once again champion himself as the savior of the country. This is definitely one of the nastiest elections in U.S. history. It is incredibly divisive. You have all the political issues, but this one is known more for the personal attacks that are launched by both sides of the campaign. They get incredibly nasty. Jackson and his people accuse Adams of, while he had been ambassador to Russia many years before, they say Adams had procured American girls to be the mistresses of the Tsar of Russia, taking away their virtue and their good name all to score political points with a foreign nation. What Adams and his people say about Jackson is way more interesting. Jackson, of course, is nothing more than a common murderer. He had been in a couple of duels in his life. This is something that by this point has really gone out of fashion. But hey, Jackson did it. Jackson likes to kill people. He has that really bad temper. They also they go so far as to accuse his mother of having been brought over by the British Army as a prostitute. And so, now they're attacking his mother. They further launch attacks against his wife, accusing her of having been married to two people at the same time. Technically, that was true. She had been married to a man who turned out to be kind of a pitiful excuse for a husband. She had left him. She thought she had gotten divorced. Andrew Jackson married her. They then found out that the paperwork had not gone through, and so technically she was still married to this other man. You know what? It's the late 1700s. That happens. Paperwork gets lost back then. But they still attack her for it. Jackson supporters are going to also bring up and kind of remind everybody of the corrupt bargain that happened in 1824 over and over and over again. They're not going to let this one go. And so, the way the election goes, Jackson's going to win. An overwhelming majority in the Electoral College, 178 to 83. Calhoun is going to be reelected as vice president, of course. Now, the other results of this election are important to note. In December of 1828, so about a month after the election, Rachel Jackson suffers a heart attack. And this is Rachel Jackson, and she was the love of Andrew Jackson's life. She would have been a little bit older in 1828 than she was in this painting. But she suffers this heart attack. And the doctor that is called in to check on her, this is not a heart attack that kills her immediately. she will be bedridden for 4 days. The doctor comes in to check on her, looks her over, and basically says, this has so weakened her. This heart attack has so weakened her, and his diagnosis is that it was brought on by stress caused by the campaign, caused by the things the other party was saying about her. Like I said, after a couple of days, she finally does pass away. And why is this important? It's important because Jackson is going to blame her death on his political opponents. And because he blames her death, because he sees her death as being a result of politics, to Jackson, the political is personal. Opposition to him politically, in his mind, equates to opposition personally. He will end friendships with people simply because they do not support his political goals. And that will end up characterizing some of his presidency and show some of the flaws of his leadership. All right, I hope that was good enough for you. I hope you got the understanding you needed.